For this activity, we're going to be creating the payroll record class. So there's a company that does payroll for lots of different other companies. And what they get is they receive a data file that looks like this. It has number of hours they worked this week and what their pay rate is per hour. And then it has their name. And sometimes their name is in first, last order. Sometimes it's in last, comma, first order. So we're going to need to do some string manipulation to manage that detail. But this data comes in, and what this company does is it does payroll reports for these companies. So it computes gross and then generates a couple of different kinds of reports for them. Now this would just be the beginning of this. There would be more detail added later. For example, it might have number of dependents and say, and compute net, do a variety of things. But we're just going to start with the very beginning, and what we're going to do is just compute the gross. So you're going to be creating this from scratch. You'll be using the PayrollRecord Class library, and these are empty right now, so you'll just fill them up from scratch. Main is just waiting there for you to add things to it. And this PayrollRecord Class has private data members, 4 of them, hours, pay rate, first name and last name. And now it has public static constants. Now this is something we haven't written before. We've used them, right? We used them with the string class, the constant NPOS, no position. So we've used them before, but we haven't written. So I'll do a video for you that explains how to do with those. There are getter methods and setter methods. So these are pretty standard getter and setter methods. One thing that you'll notice is different is the naming convention used for this. I mentioned this before in an earlier video that there are a variety of ways to name getters and setters. They're kind of specialized methods. They're really standard to have them with classes. And previously we used the standard method naming convention, which is starting with a capital letter and then using another capital letter every time it changes a name. But in this one of the perspectives is, these getters and setters are very much like dealing with variables themselves. So let's name them like variables, and that's using the lowercase and underscore. So that's what we've done here, is simply use this other convention to name the getters and setters. That keeps them lowercase and underscore like a variable name would be named. So there's getter for each one of the data members. There's setters, and remember that setters supervise the values to make sure they stay within given ranges. So here are the ranges. Hours can be 0 to 168, and if they're not there, then you set it to 0. Pay rate has to be at least the minimum wage. And that's one of the named constants is that minimum wage value. And then name. So notice that we have 4 data members, but we only have 3 setters. And that is because in all the reports, the name comes as the full name. And some of them, again, they're in these different formats. So we need to receive the name as a single one. When people set a name, they're going to send us the full name. And we're not going to complain about whether they send it to us in first, last format or last, comma, first format. They can just send a name, and we will parse that to be able to store it as a first name and a last name so that we can use it in any way we want in our reports. So parsing this is going to be string manipulation. We've done this before. In this one, you actually will likely use a new string method that we haven't used before. And that's a find method that finds the last occurrence of either a string or a character. Like we've done a find where we find the first one, right? But there is one called find last of. And this one will help you when you're trying to find the last one. Now, doing that string manipulation, you're going to first have to decide, is it in last, comma, first notation or first, last notation? If it's in last, comma, first notation, it'll have a comma in it. So you can simply look for the comma, and that tells the two apart. Then you'll know right away which format it is in. And then you can parse it because you can find that comma, and you can get a substring for the first name and a substring for the last name. You want to play with that and make sure you don't pick up any extra spaces and that you get the entire first and the entire last part. If it doesn't have a comma, then you have to be able to find the last, right? So you know it starts with the first and the middle, but then how do you find the last? And this is where you'll use the find last of, because you're going to find that last space. And the substring after that last space is going to be the last name. The substring up to that first space is going to be the first name. So a little bit of string manipulation there to handle that setter. And by the way, you don't do any supervision of what name they send. You just take whatever they send. And those are the declarations. It's going to have a default constructor, and this is what the values are set to when it's a default constructor. This is a non-default constructor. Excuse me. And when you use this non-default constructor, be sure and call those setter methods, right? Because you've got all the validation in there. So you can straight up just call those set methods in the non-default constructor. And then we're going to have a destructor. It doesn't do anything, but you still want to include it. After you get those basic ones done, it's a good idea then at this point to go ahead and in main test all the things you've done, right? You have to kind of get this far before you can do much testing. But now you can test your getters and your setters and your constructors. And there are no comments in main for you to do this. You just test all the things that you want to test. And try them with different values and make sure that everything's handled the way you expect it. Then we're going to add a couple of other methods, actually 3 more methods. One is the compute gross method that actually computes the gross pay. And if it's, if they work 40 hours or less, then it's just going to be the number of hours times their pay rate. If they work more than 40 hours, then it's going to be more of a computation, right? Because the first 40 are paid at the regular pay rate, but anything over 40 is paid at the regular pay rate times 1.5. Oh, that's an error. The error, that should be 1350. I'll fix that on the copy I send you. To do this, notice that we use this 40 and this 1.5, and those are constants. So that's our overtime rate is the 1.5, and regular hours is the 40. So these are other constants, our static constants that we will use. Instead, you won't actually, in the code, you won't actually use 40 or 1.5. You'll use these constants when you're doing those computations. And then it returns the computed gross pay. Then there's going to be a write data method that writes the output like this on 2 lines with no labels. And then there's a write report method that writes the output on 4 lines. And notice that the second, third, and fourth lines have 3 spaces at the beginning, so they indent a little bit. And then you write those. So those are the 3 additional methods that we're going to add to this class. And then you get to use it in main. And this is the part, the previous things that you did in main to test it, you don't need to turn those in. But you'll be turning these in. And what you're going to do is you're going to create an array and read the payroll data into that array. You'll get the file name from the user, and you'll read the data in and create and add objects to that array, and then keep track of how many you have in the array, so you can loop through and print out only the valid entries, not all of them. And then after you read it into an array, a note here, be sure that you, on your while loop, that you protect it from going out of bounds, right? We're going to be using an array the size that is 32 because that's how much data I've got there for you to work with. But you want to build that loop so it's based on the size of the array, and you never want to add an entry past the end of the array. So be sure and protect from going out of bounds. And then you'll write the payroll data. You'll write it to one file using the write data method. So we have the data, and you'll have one that writes the reports to the file. So when you get that far, then you can validate your code using the unit tests, and then zip your source folder and submit it to Canvas.